Jodie Morgan moved into the house opposite our street when she was 14 years old. For a 15-year-old boy, it was love at first sight. There was no meet cute. From the very beginning, it seemed like we were destined to be together forever, but enough sentimentality. What really connected us was our shared love of adventure. We constantly needed to do something. Not some everyday things, but extraordinary ones. As a child, it started with things like climbing very tall trees or exploring caves, diving off local bridges and painting water towers. It seemed like nothing was off limits as long as it stayed within the law, although a lot of it was walking on the edge, if you know what I mean. Her favorite expression was, "You always regret what you didn't do." We barely made it through high school without killing ourselves. I finished school first and got a good job laying bricks. Our school had a construction vocational training program, and I took full advantage of it. Jodie finished school a year late. She completed a nursing training program and was quickly hired by one of the local ambulance services. 6 months later, Jodie Morgan became Mrs. John Terrell. Our extracurricular activities have slowed down a lot, but they haven't disappeared. The excitement we lacked outside the house we made up for in the bedroom. When it came to sex, everything was on the menu. We worked hard. We saved money and bought a house. After the birth of our third son, Jodie quit her job. Life was good. I had 6 people working for me, and there was more work than we could handle. Only one problem still existed. Jodie began to regret it. "John, we have to do something." "With what?" "Everything seems to be fine. Are the boys okay?" "The boys are fine for now. I'm worried about us. We're stuck. If we don't do something, we'll take root and won't be able to move anymore." This is a damn exaggeration, but I understand what you want to say. Any suggestions? The boys are 8, 9, and 10 years old. I think they're old enough to do this with us. We'll have to adapt a little to get them involved, but I think it could be fun. It doesn't have to be all the time. But we have to do something. I don't want them to regret not doing something when they were young. We didn't regret it. Jodie didn't appreciate it when I started laughing. "What the hell is so funny, John? You speak the same way as 20 years ago. Is this the legacy that you are going to leave to your sons? Why not? I think it would be nice to instill this in them. I don't want them to grow up like logs. And that's all? No, I want this for myself too. There are a hell of a lot of things we haven't done yet. We can afford it, and we have time. Your guys will be able to cover for you when you need to go away." "Okay, I agree. Let's light it up." That's what they're saying now. For the next couple of years, we were constantly on the move. It wasn't continuous, but fairly regular. When one trip was over, Jodie was already planning the next 1 or 2. We all loved whitewater rafting, and it opened a few doors for us. We made 2 trips to the Boundary Waters in Minnesota. We tried bungee jumping and zip lines. We ended up with 5 kayaks. After receiving scuba diver certificates, even more opportunities opened up for us. We tried hot air ballooning, but found it boring. Jodie and I did a tandem skydive. 10 years have passed. Terry, our oldest son, joined the Air Force. Greg became a scuba diving instructor, and Robert, the youngest, became a truck driver. Jodie and I were left alone. Everything seemed to slow down. I spent more time at work, and Jodie spent more time on the internet. Jodie returned to work. For several months, everything was quiet. "John." "Yes." "I'm starting to get a little worried." "What exactly does this mean?" "I need to do something. There's a lot going on at work right now. Maybe this can wait a little?" "I guess so. Actually, I thought maybe for a change I could do something on my own." "You mean alone?" "Not really. I thought maybe with one of the girls from work. I never went anywhere without you, so it would be at least some variety." "Is there anything specific in mind?" "No. Sarah and I talked a little about it, but haven't decided anything yet." "Is this Sarah Harlow?" "Yes. You saw her at some picnics." "Is this the one who was divorced twice?" Jodie hesitated. "Yes, but that's not a problem." "Why did it happen?" "Sorry, I thought you would judge. The fact that she is divorced does not make her a bad person." I never said that, and I'm sorry if that's how you interpreted it. So you don't mind? Of course. Have I ever refused you anything? Thank you, thank you. I felt uneasy. All the trips and vacations that Jodie planned were somehow connected with her mantra. I knew it. I just needed to understand how it applies in this case. She will do something so that she doesn't regret not doing it later. There's a lot of negativity there. All I had to do was figure out what she was going to do. Over the years, the business has developed well. In addition to laying brick, we also did a lot of block masonry and poured concrete foundations. We didn't do driveways or sidewalks, just foundations and poured walls. The company was also involved in the construction of steel buildings. These were usually simple, prefabricated buildings, but some were quite large. I now have over 50 full-time employees. I never asked Jodie what she was planning. The fact that she didn't openly say what it would be made me a little uneasy. I'm sure she had something on her mind. My concerns increased significantly when I discovered that it deletes the browser history every time. I think most guys would have easily gotten around this problem, but I wasn't that smart. I didn't even know what a keylogger was. She also deleted her email correspondence, but that's where she screwed up. Jodie was putting her letters in the trash, but she didn't realize that they stayed in the trash for 30 days unless she emptied the trash every time. I started looking through her letters over the past month. Most of it was just plain junk, but the correspondence she had with Sarah was enlightening. The words were enough to confirm my suspicions, but the accompanying web links did the trick. I did not check all the sites that were linked to. This was not necessary. It's time to make a decision I won't regret. It was a Tuesday fair in Buca. I felt like a new kid at school. This was my first time going out, although I had been here for 2 days already. I wandered around for a while and finally found my assigned coffee shop. Being old school, I ordered a regular black coffee. It was still early and people were just starting to arrive, so I took one of the still empty seats. I felt weird wearing a New York Yankees cap, but that was one of the conditions given to me. Hey, new guy! Welcome to Bouquet! You must be Mickey, right? My greeter was also wearing a Yankees cap. I seemed to half rise to greet him, but he motioned for me to sit back down and did the same. Ted Williams. Always a pleasure to meet a fellow ball player. He shook my hand vigorously. We both laughed a little at the inappropriate ball player reference. I thought it was a joke, but I had a feeling that a lot of people knew about it. How many players are we talking about? At the moment, it looks like there are 10 baseball players and 3 tennis players. Tennis. The baseball players are all boys, but there are 3 other girls in the program, and Hector decided that tennis was better for them. Are they all here? All but one. Chris Evert lives in David. That's when Sandy Koufax and Bob Feller joined us. Before the morning was over, I met 4 more famous ball players. Bob quickly got to the point. So, Mr. Mickey Mantle, in 25 words, no more? Tell us why you decided to choose Panama Promotions Alternatives. From the way the question was phrased, I guessed that no one wanted the gruesome details, just a quick overview. My wife of 23 years decided she wanted to spread her wings, and I decided I didn't want to stand in her way, so I left. Yogi Bear was the first to respond. It was more than 25 words. Ted poked him in the ribs. Over the next 20 minutes, each of the guys talked about the reasons for their participation in the program. They were almost all different, but the results were the same. 10 boys and 3 girls signed up for PPA to avoid unwanted situations at home. It wasn't cheap, and it wasn't foolproof. Basically, we got a new name, a new driver's license, and a new bank account. Unfortunately, we were still U.S. citizens and had to pay taxes in our old names. All except Joe DiMaggio, who was from Canada. If someone really wanted to find us, they could do it. In all, heroes received new names identical to the names of famous athletes. Hector Ruiz organized Panama Promotions Alternatives so that people in our situation would have at least some option to disappear without going to extremes. It wasn't a Black Ops type system. In fact, it was quite loose. Hector was an avid baseball fan. Everything wasn't exactly kosher, but it was buttered up enough for us to feel comfortable. The name change was properly completed and the driver's license and bank accounts were in order. Using them was not easy, but quite doable. It was almost noon when my cell phone rang. I haven't had time to buy a new one yet. The whole team watched me. Read the message. AIR Jamaica Flight 247 landed at Philadelphia International Airport from Montego Bay. I looked at my companions and smiled. Gentlemen, my wife has just returned home from a 10-day vacation. That night, we all went to the Rock for some ribs. I spent the next few months getting to know the area. There was always one or two team members nearby for communication and assistance. I notified all three boys of the situation, but without details. Their mother could explain everything to them. Hector insisted that all PPA participants carry emergency suitcases with the most necessary things in case of a sudden departure. Both Barry Bonds and Willie Mays had to use their briefcases at some point. Barry was being tracked by his irritated wife, and Willie was being looked for by his two brothers-in-law. They were more than happy to recommend items that I should have with me if needed. The need arose sooner than I expected. The phone rang at 5 a.m. Who the hell would be calling at a time like this? Mr. Mantle, this is Hector. The driver will be with you in 30 minutes. Prepare everything you need and be prepared to stay at least a week, maybe longer. Don't tell anyone anything. I'll take care of everything. There wasn't really much to do. I had plenty of time to shower and shave and still be ready to leave. Luckily, the driver had brought some cornmeal tortillas with him. An hour later, we were in David. Chris Everett was waiting with an emergency suitcase when we pulled up. I have no idea why she chose David over Boke. When we drove south, the temperatures were completely different. She didn't look like a tennis player at all. Of course, I didn't look like a baseball player either. She looked more like a Mediterranean type. We introduced ourselves, and she began to get settled. She had already had breakfast, and I ate her scones. Do you have any idea where we're going? I shook my head. No. Don't you know why? I pretended to be ignorant again. She had a dejected expression on her face and sat silently for the rest of the ride. 30 minutes later, we arrived at a small pier. I had no idea where we were. I know absolutely nothing about sailboats. I only know that the one we found ourselves on was medium in size. After unloading us and our bags, the driver smiled, waved, and drove off. The boat was called the Yankee Clipper. I thought it was ironic. The captain, Jamie Ruiz, was Hector's cousin. His assistant was a young local girl named Marisol. It turned out that he steered the ship and she took care of everything else. I had no idea what we would do or how much we would be charged for this service, but it didn't matter. Our things were stowed in the back cabin, and we gathered on deck to drink coffee and eat some biscuits. It was still too early for lunch. Jaime Prudley told us about his Peterson 44. It meant nothing to me. Chris and I both acted like we were interested, wanting to please him. I looked at her a few times, and it was easy to understand how she was feeling. However, he caught her attention when he mentioned that we would be staying in the main cabin and he and Marisol would be opposite. I'm very sorry, but this doesn't suit me. She said this in all seriousness. I smiled, and Jaime looked a little embarrassed. I don't even know this person, and I don't intend to share a bed or even a room with him. You'll have to come up with something else. Jaime didn't have a quick answer, so I had to intervene. Don't worry about it. I can use the master bathroom, and I'll have no problem sleeping on the fold-out bed in the galley. I'm sure Miss Chris won't mind me keeping my bag in her room. Is that okay with you? After I said that, I realized that by using the expression, Miss Chris, I was making a fool of myself. You need to be careful not to repeat this mistake in the future. Chris went below to settle into her cabin while I wandered around the deck. Jamie and Marisol pulled away from the dock using the auxiliary engine. I had no idea where we were and no idea where we were going, and I didn't care. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew was Marisol calling me to dinner. It looked like most of the dining would be on deck. This suited me quite well. After a light lunch, Jamie opened the small tablet computer. What we do know is that they asked the woman at the car rental place for directions to David. Chris sank into her chair, sighed, and said, Damn. Mr. Mantle, your wife, Jodie Terrell, came on the same flight from Philadelphia and also rented a car. We don't know anything else. Marisol, do you have a cold beer? Miss Everett, your ex-husband, Anthony Krupe, and several friends arrived in Panama City last night and rented a car this morning. That's it. I couldn't think of anything smarter. 30 minutes later, Jaime and Marisol were raising the sails, and soon we were racing at full speed into the open ocean. Chris spent the rest of the day below, while I lay on the deck enjoying the sun and wind, and finally I got my cold beer. For the next 3 days, everything was calm. I slept in the galley, Chris occupied the master bedroom, and Jaime and Marisol shared the forward cabin. I tried to be helpful, helping Jaime whenever I could. Chris helped Marisol, but prepared some of the dishes herself. She was great at brunch-type dinners. Nobody complained. She seemed comfortable in the kitchen and the living room. I spent most of my free time on deck, except in the rain. It rained almost every day, but not all day. When we weren't sailing, Jaime would find a few quiet coves and bays to moor the boat for a while. I caught a few fish, but had no idea what kind of fish they were. All I knew was that they were pretty tasty. Chris spent time on deck, but usually wore a light blanket. She had a one-piece swimsuit that was skimpy and seemed a little old-fashioned for her. Unlike Jodie, Chris was short and stocky. She was not fat, but quite well-fed. I found it interesting, but not erotic. You know, a little sun would help you maintain that beautiful tan. It was a weak attempt on my part to be friendly. It's not a tan, idiot. The sun ages the skin and is the main cause of melanoma. I'd rather cover up than look like an old woman with tanned skin. It was unexpected. Her skin had a golden sheen to it, and I just assumed it was from a normal tan. She must have really been Mediterranean. Tomorrow I'll try a different approach. Everything was quiet and serene. Who am I kidding? It was damn boring. By the end of the week, Chris was finally warming up. The conversations were short and meaningless, but they were conversations. That evening, after dinner, we were on deck, and she decided to open up a little. Mickey, why are you here? What made you sign a contract with the PPA? Since I decided to live in David and not in Boca, I feel a little out of place. You all know each other up there. It should work both ways. Let's put it this way. You tell me your story and I'll tell you mine. But first, I need to know one thing. Yes. What exactly? What is your real name? We're not supposed to talk, but to hell with it. My name is Carla. Great. You can call me John. I find it funny to respond to Mickey. Carla reached into the refrigerator and got us both a new bottle of beer. I won't bore you with the long story. I got married about 8 years ago in Westchester to the son of an old family friend. I guess you could call it an arranged marriage, although technically it wasn't. My family was well off, and so did his family. Unfortunately, I couldn't have children, so my husband decided he needed to find someone else. Should I continue? I smiled, nodded, and took a sip of beer. My family, the Randazzos, were in the municipal construction business. They did all the traffic lights, street lights, storm drains, and other similar projects in 3 counties. It was very profitable. The Krupe family owned 4 restaurants, several pizzerias, and sandwich shops. How did you end up here? My husband Tony just told me he was having a baby with his last girlfriend. He was going to move her into our house while she was pregnant, and they would find a better place to live after the baby was born. He seemed to be very confident in himself. He has always been like this. She brought us 2 more cold ones. I smiled and waited for her to continue. I burned down the house, as well as 3 cars. Then I burned down the largest of Krupe's restaurants, and finally I cleaned out all the bank accounts, including savings and investments. 2 days later, I was here. We sat in silence for a few minutes, enjoying our beer. Okay, John, now it's your turn. My wife, Jodie, and I met when we were kids. We grew up together and got into trouble all the time. She loved every minute of it. Her mantra was, "You always regret the things you don't do," and she lived it that way. Over time, we got married and had 3 children. I started my own construction business, which grew very well. Every chance we got, we did something adventurous and exciting. When the children grew up, she got a little bored and decided to set up one of her own adventures. The nature of the project she had chosen meant that I could not go with her, and, unfortunately, she could not discuss it with me. Carla handed me a new cold beer. I think I see where this is going. I'm no computer whiz, but I had no trouble figuring it out. It really bothered me. I don't know what was worse, knowing what she was going to do, or knowing that she was keeping it a secret from me. We shared everyone's lives, and now it had to happen. As I understand it, you waited until she left before finishing everything? Yes. I gave my business to my employees in exchange for a share in future profits and took a good chunk of our savings, but not all. I left her the house and everything else. Are you sure she did what you think she did? No. I don't want to know, and I don't need to know more than I know. I don't need this grief. Have you heard anything about her since then? Nope. We sat in silence for a while, and then Carla excused herself and went to bed. That night, I slept on the deck. The next day, some kind of storm broke out. By dinner, it got really bad. Jaime and Marisol spent quite a bit of time setting up ropes or anchors, or something similar to prepare for the night. They seemed to know what they were doing, so I felt calm. All I could think about were the lyrics from an old Queen song. Thunder and lightning, very, very scary. Galileo, Galileo. I don't know what was worse, the bright flashes of lightning or the loud peals of thunder. It was hard to fall asleep, and it didn't help that Carla kept shaking me. What the hell do you want? This is a really bad storm, John. Come down to the cabin with me, quickly. It's okay. I'm fine. Don't worry about me. Go back to bed. I'm not worried about you, asshole. I'm worried about myself. Get your ass to the cabin now. She pulled my hand. I spent the rest of the night holding her. Most of the time, she pulled the blanket over her head. By the next morning, everything was quiet and calm. I woke up with a breast in my hand and a raging excitement. She seemed to be awake and aware of both states, but did not know what to do and simply lay there motionless. As smoothly as I could, I moved my butt away and removed my hand. I had no idea how it ended up under her nightgown. As we settled down on the bed, she turned to face me. Thank you, John. I needed this. She slid off the bed and went into the control room. I had no idea what she meant. I fell over the side of the bunk with relief. Carla was very friendly for the rest of the day. Jamie and Marisol enjoyed making us feel awkward about our night together. The comments and jokes didn't stop all day. In fact, it seems that Carla herself gave reasons for this a couple of times. I was more embarrassed than she was. In the evening, after a few glasses of beer on deck, Carla took my hand, and we went to the cabin together. We barely slept that night. It was a new experience for me. My first woman besides Jodie. It was different and, at the same time, the same. It's hard to describe, but I really enjoyed it. I didn't feel any guilt. Unfortunately, it was also our last night aboard the Yankee Clipper. On the way home, our driver told us the latest news. It looks like Jodie left broke after a week and returned home. Carla's husband, however, simply disappeared along with his 2 companions. They found a rental car in the middle of nowhere, but with no passengers. We dropped Carla off at her apartment and I was home within an hour. The first person I met the next morning was Billie Jean King. She spent most of the week with Jodie while I was gone. Jodie spent a couple of days showing my photo around town. It didn't take her long to realize that I was now Mickey Mantle. Apart from the guys from the PPA, no one hid anything about me. They simply didn't have any information to give her other than my address. When she realized I wasn't coming back, she gave up and left. She didn't say much, but she told Billie Jean that I left because she screwed up. That's all she said. Doesn't sound like much of an explanation, but then again, it was secondhand. However, if she really thought so, then my leaving was the right choice. Things went pretty normally for the next few months, except that I spent 2 or 3 days a week in David and Carla, spent a couple of days a week in Boca. There was never any deep emotional attachment between us. It was just a good friendship. In the end, she decided that I was not going to move to David and found us a bigger and better apartment in Boca, and we teamed up. Carla decided to take up watercolor painting, and I took up sports seriously. So serious that Willie Mays, Sandy Koufax, and I decided to open our own gym. A gym, so to speak. This was a fun little project. A whole group of expats in the area had unused exercise equipment sitting around. It's funny how people buy these things without realizing that they don't help if you don't use them. In a short time, we had more simulators than we needed. More than half of them were not gym grade, and we ended up having to throw them away. Nobody seemed offended by this. They just wanted to get rid of them. Monica Seles was very happy that we were open so she could start yoga and Zumba classes. We charged a small monthly fee to cover rent, utilities, and insurance. Things were going well at the gym, and Carla was delighted with her painting. However, everything else was not so rosy. PPA has turned into a ball of worms. Hector tried his best to make everything work, but it was too difficult. Several guys had problems with their passports. The tax situation was confusing. In addition, difficulties with banking transactions could confuse anyone. After several group meetings, it was decided to abandon the program. Everyone agreed with this except Joe DiMaggio. Hector agreed to make an exception for him. It took a couple of weeks, but eventually everyone had new driver's licenses and bank accounts. Our old passports were still in order. The only downside now was that we would be easier to find. We still retained Hector as our legal advisor and trustee. We also kept our emergency suitcases just in case. A year has passed, and I didn't even notice it. The checks still came every month. They varied in amount, but were always more than sufficient. The good news was that Carla had much more money than me, and she didn't skimp. We lived a good life and lacked for nothing. I have not had any contact with Jodie or my sons since I last called them. The next 6 months were quite active. One day I came home to find Carla sitting on the porch with a stranger. Michael Randazzo came from Westchester to spend the week with his daughter. They haven't spoken since she left. Her mother was unable to come due to heart problems. I felt a little uneasy, but he quickly calmed me down. He was truly grateful that his daughter was happy and cared for. I felt a little uneasy, especially since I was almost 20 years older than her. Over the next week, Michael and I spent several hours together. He apologized for letting the problem with Carla's husband get out of hand. He never said it, but I got the idea that Anthony Krupe never returned to the States and never will. I didn't ask for an explanation. It was his monkey and his circus. He tried to get the charges against Carla dropped, but was unsuccessful. He also asked me about my marital status and seemed genuinely interested in my answer. The week passed quickly. Carla was happy, and that only made me feel better. Before leaving, he took me aside. "John, Carla needs to see her mother. She can't come back like Carla Krupe, but she can do it like Carla Terrell. Think about it." I interpreted this as his approval. 6 weeks later, I received another surprise. My son Greg arrived. "You're hard to find, Dad, but not impossible. Sorry for not keeping in touch, but I assume you know the situation." "Actually, Dad, none of us know. We tried everything, but Mom refuses to tell us anything. She only says that it was her fault, and nothing more. It's been over a year now, and I haven't heard anything from her. She showed up over a year ago, and I avoided her the whole time she was here. I was still too limp at that time." "From what, Dad? Are you going to give us a hint?" "No, I've already said too much. Now, what the hell are you doing here?" "Do you know where Boca del Toro is?" "Of course. It's about 5 hours north of here." "What?" "I bought 50% of the dive shop. I'm here to do all the paperwork. I'll be moving in next month." "What is your mother doing?" "She was pretty depressed for a while. Then she found a new job. She works in the junior high school cafeteria. She tried to sell the house, but couldn't without your signature, so she rented it out and rented an apartment. We talked to her about. She got a better job, but she got upset and told us to mind our own business. Between the rent she gets for the house and her salary, I think she's doing okay. At that moment, Carla entered. It was obvious that she lived here, and none of us thought about hiding it. "Hi, you must be Greg. John talks a lot about you." Greg was surprised, and it showed on his face. Carla laughed. "It's okay, Greg. Just consider me your dad's housekeeper. Who wants a beer?" She knew how to melt the ice. Greg suddenly felt comfortable in this situation. We talked a little more, and then went to dinner. Before Greg left for the States, I gave him a power of attorney so Jodie could sell the house. A month later, he returned to start his new business. I haven't had any contact with the business since I left. That was the plan. The checks kept coming, and I had no reason to pry into it. After a few months, I noticed that my monthly contributions to the company had increased significantly. I left Gary Jones in charge of the company and felt it was time to test him. "Gary, this is John." "Damn, it's high time. You've been gone for almost 2 years. What's going on?" "I was going to ask you the same question. I saw a big jump in my monthly checks and I was curious. Is there anything I should know about?" "A couple of months ago, we were visited by a company from Philadelphia called Empire Industries. Have you ever heard of them?" "Of course I've heard of them. Empire Industries was owned by the Randazzo family. All this must have happened shortly after I met Carla's father." "Yes, I heard about them. I know one of the owners, Michael Randazzo. What happened to lead to this?" "They explained to us that they had a lot of different jobs coming up that didn't fit into their normal business. They wanted to subcontract the jobs and ask it if we were interested. We didn't see anything wrong with the offer, so we agreed to give it a try for a period of time. 90 days. It worked out great for use. We had a lot of new work in Chester and Montgomery counties, and I had to hire 12 more people. I also had to buy 3 more trucks and some other equipment." "Is everything under control, or do you need help?" "John, everything is fine, but we would like you to come back. I haven't had a single day off since you left. I could use a week on the shore." We both laughed a little at his suggestion. "Gary, let me think for a moment. I'll call you back." I could hear him smirking on the other end of the line. "Gary, did Jodie come in at all?" "To be honest, John, she was only here once. About a week after you left, she showed up. I explained to her that you were no longer associated with the company, as you told me. I know she wanted to know more, but couldn't bring herself to ask. She didn't cry or get upset. She looked a little sad. We didn't see her again." That evening, I had a light but serious conversation with Carla, and she swore that she knew nothing about what her dad had done. However, she thought it was funny. Months passed, and everything went well. I got a surprise at Christmas when Terry showed up. Greg shared everything with both of his brothers, but carefully hid most of it from his mother. Of course, she knew where I was, and I'm sure she suspected Greg and I were hooking up since he was in Panama, too. He just never shared anything with her, and she never asked. Terry spent 2 days with me and Carla in Boca, and the rest of the time in Boca's del Toro with Greg. Greg promised to help him recertify in scuba diving while he was here. Terry brought 2 things that Jodie wanted him to give to me. The first was a check for $210,000, my share from the sale of the house. It was her decision, not mine. The second thing was the final decision on divorce. There was no letter, no explanation, no message, only 2 envelopes. When he left, I had no message or letter for him to pick up. A curtain. I didn't regret anything. 2 months later, Carla Terrell received a new passport and was traveling with her new husband to visit her mother. It was a round-trip ticket. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.